They drove away with her puppy. Then the court tried to send the mother dog back to the same people who left her chained to die. The house was empty, the moving truck long gone, but in the backyard, a mother dog still lay chained to a tree, staring at the gate where her puppy disappeared. When a quiet neighbor finally climbed the fence, she found more than neglect. She found a choice. And days later, a phone call came that threatened to return Hazel to the very hands that abandoned her. The house looked finished. Not abandoned in a dramatic way, not broken or vandalized, but finished, like a sentence that had reached its period and refused to say anything more. The driveway was empty, the garage door shut tight, the windows dark even under the hard summer sun. Whatever life had been there had been carefully packed, labeled, and driven away. In the backyard, Hazel lay exactly where she always did. The chain was still looped around the old maple tree, its metal links warmed by hours of sunlight. Hazel's body rested within that small circle of dirt and flattened grass, the boundaries of her world drawn by steel and habit. She faced the gate, head low, ears angled forward, not alert, not relaxed, just waiting. The water bowl sat a few feet away, tipped slightly, bone dry. Ants moved along its rim, undisturbed. Hazel did not bark. 3 days ago, the yard had been full of sound. Cardboard scraping concrete, voices calling back and forth, doors opening and closing, the sharp smell of tape and dust. Hazel had watched it all from her place beneath the tree, tail thumping slowly against the ground, trusting the rhythm of familiar chaos. She had learned that noise like that always ended the same way, with everyone coming back inside, with food clinking into her bowl, with a small warm body curling against her side at night. Now there was only quiet, the kind of quiet that pressed down instead of floating. The kind that made even the cicadas in the trees sound distant, unsure. Hazel shifted slightly, the chain responding with a soft metallic scrape. She lifted her head and sniffed the air. The smells were wrong. No trace of the humans who belonged to this place, no echo of shoes on the porch. And, worse than all of it, no scent of her puppy. That absence sat heavier than hunger. Hazel's eyes followed the line of the fence to the gate, the same gate she had watched for hours, then days. She had not moved far from it. She had not wandered the yard. The instinct to stay close, to be ready, kept her anchored more firmly than the chain ever could. Mothers waited. That was what they did. If you stayed, if you watched closely enough, what you loved would come back. At least that had always been true before. The sun crept higher. Heat settled into Hazel's coat, thick and dull from days without care. She stood once, stretched stiffly, then lay back down. Her breathing was slow, shallow. Not labored yet, just tired. The kind of tired that came from holding yourself still for too long. From the neighboring yard, a lawn sprinkler clicked on, spraying bright arcs of water into green grass. Hazel watched it without interest. Her own yard had begun to yellow. The shade beneath the maple tree was thinning as the afternoon wore on, but she did not move to chase it. She had chosen her place. A breeze passed through the yard, lifting the corner of a small cloth near the porch, a faded towel that had once been soft. Hazel's nose twitched. She dragged herself forward until the chain pulled tight, just close enough to reach it. The towel carried a scent so faint it almost wasn't there anymore. Warm, familiar, small. Her puppy. Hazel pressed her nose into the fabric and inhaled, slow and deep, as if she could pull time backward through sheer will. Her tail did not wag, her body did not relax. She simply lay there, breathing in what was left, eyes fixed once more on the gate. The gate did not open. As evening approached, the shadows lengthened across the yard. The house remained silent. No car turned into the driveway. No footsteps crossed the porch. The world beyond the fence continued as if nothing had changed. Hazel let out a sound then, not a bark, not a whine, just a low, broken breath that escaped her chest and vanished into the quiet. She lowered her head to her paws, still facing the gate, still waiting. Because the last thing she remembered clearly was this. They had taken her puppy, and they had told her, without words, that they would come back. and Hazel had believed them. Night cooled the yard, but it didn't soften anything. It only made the emptiness clearer, as if darkness had erased the last polite disguises of daytime. Hazel's eyes stayed on the gate until the stars came out, until the air turned still and dry, until her eyelids grew heavy and she forced them open again. Somewhere across the street, a television flickered behind curtains. A door shut. A laugh burst and disappeared. Life continued, just not here, and that was what made the memory return so sharply. It came in pieces at first, like light sliding between moving boxes. The morning had started with the sound of a truck backing up, that low mechanical beeping, steady and indifferent. Hazel had lifted her head then, curious, not worried. She remembered the children's voices, bright, quick, excited, in the way humans got when they were going somewhere new. The man's voice, strained but cheerful, calling out measurements. The woman's voice answering, laughter pinned to the end of it, like a note taped onto a box. Careful, that's fragile. Hazel had watched from the shade of the maple tree while the world inside the house moved outward in a stream of furniture and cardboard. Each time the door opened, a new smell floated out. Dust, tape, old cushions, the sharp tang of cleaning spray. She saw their hands full, their shoulders tight, their faces flushed with effort. But no one looked afraid. No one moved like they were leaving forever. They moved like people moved when they expected to come back. At some point, the puppy had appeared on the porch, small and clumsy, still growing into his paws. He had bounded down the steps as if the whole yard belonged to him, ears flopping, tail beating the air. Hazel's body had risen automatically, an instinct older than thought. She had stepped forward, sniffed him head to tail, then nudged him gently with her nose. He had squeaked and bounced away, as if even love was a game. The woman had scooped him up a few minutes later. Hazel remembered that moment with a clarity that hurt. The puppy's legs had dangled, kicking once in surprise, then settling as he recognized the woman's arms. The woman had pressed her face against his fur, kissed the top of his head, and made that sound humans made when something was precious and small. The puppy had licked her chin, eager and trusting. Hazel had waited for the rest of the familiar routine, for the puppy to be set back down, for the door to open again, for someone to call her name. Instead, the woman walked past Hazel toward the driveway. Hazel's ears had lifted. Her tail had started to wag, slow and steady. She assumed it was her turn next. That was how it always worked. Puppy first because puppy was lighter. Puppy first because puppy was still learning. Puppy first because puppy needed more help. Hazel had followed as far as her chain allowed, the collar shifting against her neck. She hadn't pulled hard. She hadn't panicked. She simply leaned forward and watched. The man opened the car door. The woman placed the puppy on the backseat blanket, the same blanket Hazel remembered from short trips to parks and lakes. The puppy turned once, sniffed the seat, then sat, looking back toward Hazel as if expecting her to jump in beside him. Hazel's tail beat faster against the grass. She gave a soft little chuff, a mother's reassurance. I'm here. I'm coming. Then the door shut. The sound was final in a way Hazel didn't understand at first. The click of the lock, the muffled seal of rubber and glass. The puppy's face vanished behind a reflection of sky. Hazel stepped forward again, chain scraping. The man glanced at her, just a glance, and for a second Hazel thought he was about to walk over. His hand even moved toward his pocket as if reaching for something. But then he turned away. "Don't worry," the woman said, her voice floating back like a tossed scrap of kindness. "We'll come back for her." She said it casually, the way humans said things they expected to be true simply because they spoke them. She said it with her back half turned, already focused on the next task. Hazel didn't know the words, but she knew the tone, soft, familiar, the same tone used for promises. Hazel's tail wagged harder. She stood tall, ears forward, eyes bright with expectation. She had watched them leave before. Work, errands, school. They always came back. The gate always opened again. Food always arrived. The puppy always returned smelling of grass and milk and whatever adventure he had stumbled into. The engine started. Hazel's body stiffened, not with fear, but with attention. The car rolled forward slowly, tires crunching gravel. The puppy shifted on the seat. Hazel saw his nose pressed toward the window, his breath fogging a small circle. He looked at her, ears perked, head tilted, a question written in the shape of his body. Hazel answered the only way she knew how. She barked once, not angry, not desperate, just a single clear sound to say, "I see you. I'm still here." "Wait!" The car kept moving. Hazel barked again, the sound higher this time. Confused, the chain tightened against her collar as she leaned forward. Her paws dug into the dirt. The collar bit slightly, nothing painful, just enough to remind her of the boundary she had never needed to test before. The woman waved without looking back properly. The man didn't wave at all. The car turned the corner and disappeared. Hazel stood frozen, chest lifted, ears straining at the empty street. She listened for the engine to circle back, to correct itself, to return as if the last 30 seconds had been a mistake. The sound faded completely. Minutes passed. Hazel didn't sit. She didn't lie down. She held herself in place, staring at the gate, waiting for the squeal of brakes, the return of voices, the small thump of puppy paws running across the porch. But the next thing she heard was something else entirely. The moving truck door slamming shut. The low rumble of its engine, the laughter of the children now inside the car, muffled and drifting away. A final bang of the front door locking. Then silence. Not the quiet of a naptime afternoon. A different kind. The kind that made the air feel too big. Hazel pulled once, harder than before. The chain clinked, the collar tightened. She stopped. She tried again. The gate didn't move. Nothing moved. She turned in a small circle, looking for a face, for a figure, for any sign that she had misunderstood. There was no one. Her tail slowed, then stilled. A faint tremor ran through her body, not from cold, but from uncertainty. Hazel lowered herself to the ground, still facing the gate, still believing it would open. Because it had to. A mother didn't stop believing in the return of her child after a single hour. As the sun dropped low, Hazel watched shadows crawl across the yard. Her puppy's scent still clung to the air like a fading thread, and Hazel held onto it with everything she had. She licked the towel near the porch once, then again, slow and careful, as if preserving a memory. By the time night settled, she had stopped barking altogether. There was no point in wasting breath on a gate that did not answer. But Hazel still listened. Every time a car passed on the street, her ears flicked. Every time a distant door shut, her head lifted. Every sound became a possibility. Every possibility became hope. And hope became a painful thing she could not put down. In the dark, Hazel tucked her nose against the old towel and breathed in the last trace of her puppy, holding it the way a drowning creature holds air. She did not know what abandonment was. She only knew that somewhere beyond the fence her puppy was alive, and she was not there with him. Morning arrived without ceremony. The sun rose, light spilled across the fence, and the world resumed its schedule as if nothing had broken here. Hazel noticed the change only because the shadows moved. She shifted once to keep the gate in view, her muscles stiff from holding the same posture through the night. The towel beneath her chin smelled weaker now, the warmth of memory thinning as hours passed. She listened. At first every sound mattered. A car door closing somewhere down the street made her ears lift sharply. Footsteps on a sidewalk, too light, moving away. A delivery truck idled, then drove on. Hazel's body responded to each noise with the same fragile hope, a readiness that surged and fell again, again, again. Each time the gate stayed closed, something inside her loosened and slid lower, like sand slipping through a narrow crack. By late morning, heat settled into the yard. The shade beneath the maple tree crept away from Hazel's flank, leaving her exposed to the sun. She did not follow it. The gate mattered more. Hunger tugged at her belly, an unfamiliar, hollow pull, but she ignored it. Mothers waited first. Needs could come later. The bowl stayed empty. Hazel rose once and walked the length of her chain, tracing the same arc she had worn into the dirt over the years. She sniffed the ground where the puppy had slept, pressed her nose into the shallow impression, and pawed at it gently. The dirt gave way beneath her claws, dry and powdery. She dug a little more, then stopped. There was nothing there to uncover, no warmth hiding below the surface, only the echo of where something had been. She lay down again, closer to the gate than before. The second day did not bring answers either. Hazel's movements slowed, as if conserving something precious she wasn't sure she would get back. She drank what little moisture she could find from a dark patch of soil near the tree roots, then returned to her place. When the sun reached its highest point, her tongue hung dry in her mouth. Flies circled, landing briefly on her coat before buzzing off. She did not snap at them. That afternoon, a neighbor's dog barked from somewhere beyond the fence line. Hazel lifted her head. The bark was sharp, confident, full of expectation. Hazel answered with nothing. She didn't have the strength for conversation, not when all her attention was pointed in one direction, fixed on one missing thing. As evening fell, Hazel's waiting changed. It was no longer alert. It became heavy. Her head rested on her paws now, eyes half-lidded, still angled toward the gate. She slept in short, shallow pieces, waking at the slightest sound, heart kicking hard against her ribs before settling again into disappointment. Each time she woke, she checked the same place, as if the world might rearrange itself while she wasn't looking. The third day came quietly, without promise. Hazel did not stand when the sun rose. She did not circle her chain. She stayed where she was, breathing slow and shallow, her body learning a new economy. The waiting had become something else, no longer a tense readiness, but a dull ache that filled the hours and pressed against her chest. She made a sound then. It slipped out of her without warning, low and broken, barely louder than the rustle of leaves. It was not a bark meant to travel. It was not a call for humans. It was a sound shaped only for one listener, a sound made to bridge a distance Hazel did not understand. She stopped when no answer came, as if embarrassed by the effort. That night, the sky clouded over. Heat clung to the air, thick and unmoving. Hazel shifted once, trying to find relief, then settled again. Her eyes closed, opened, closed. Somewhere inside her, the certainty that had carried her through the first hours began to thin. Maybe the puppy was lost. Maybe he was waiting too, somewhere else, confused in the same way, expecting her to appear. The thought steadied Hazel for a while. She imagined him curling up alone, looking for her warmth. She imagined him calling softly, the way he did when he couldn't find her in the yard. She imagined herself standing, breaking free of the chain through sheer force of will, following his scent across streets and fields until she reached him. But imagination required energy, and energy was running low. By the end of the third day, Hazel had stopped licking the towel. She kept it close, but she no longer pressed her nose into it. The smell had faded too much, and the effort cost her more than it gave back. Her breathing slowed. Her eyes dulled, not with sleep, but with something heavier. Waiting, she discovered, was not passive. It was work. It demanded attention, endurance, belief. And belief, when it stretched too long without reward, began to fray. As darkness settled once more over the yard, Hazel remained facing the gate. She did not know how to stop. She did not know where else to go. The world had narrowed to one unanswered question, and she stayed with it because leaving would mean accepting a truth she was not ready to carry. Beyond the fence, a porch light flicked on. A television murmured. Somewhere, a family sat down to dinner. In the yard, Hazel waited, still, quiet, and running out of reasons. Elaine Parker noticed the sound because it did not belong. Her days followed patterns she trusted. Quiet mornings, the soft hum of appliances, the predictable cadence of pages turning at the library where she worked. Silence had texture to her. It had weight. And when something disturbed it, she felt it the way other people felt sudden cold. That afternoon, the disturbance came through her open kitchen window. It was faint. So faint she almost dismissed it as wind pressing through leaves or the distant creak of an old fence. Elaine paused at the sink, one hand resting on the counter, listening. The sound came again, low, uneven, carrying something raw beneath it. Not a bark, not quite a whine. It sounded less like a call and more like the last breath someone took before deciding not to speak again. Elaine dried her hands slowly and stepped onto her back porch. The neighborhood looked unchanged, lawns trimmed, driveways full, children's bikes tipped over near mailboxes. Summer carried on, indifferent. The house next door stood out only because it didn't participate. Its blinds were shut, its porch bare, its yard slightly overgrown, as if it had already begun forgetting itself. The sound came once more. Elaine followed it to the fence. She leaned forward, gripping the top rail, peering into the neighboring yard. At first she saw nothing but the harsh geometry of afternoon light, patches of shade, dry grass, a maple tree casting a crooked shadow. Then her eyes adjusted, and she saw the dog. The animal lay close to the gate, body stretched thin against the ground. The chain caught the light, a dull glint leading back to the tree. Elaine inhaled sharply. She recognized the dog immediately, not as a stranger, but as a presence she had noticed for years without really seeing. The calm German shepherd mix that used to nap in the yard, the one that watched quietly while children played, the one that never barked without reason. Hazel lifted her head a fraction when Elaine shifted. Their eyes met. Elaine felt something tighten in her chest, not fear, not surprise, but recognition. The dog's gaze did not ask for help. It did not plead. It simply rested on Elaine, steady and exhausted, as if measuring whether this new figure belonged to the long list of things that came and went. Elaine's throat went dry. She scanned the yard quickly. No water bowl with any sign of moisture. No food, no open door. The house beyond the yard sat sealed tight like a box already taped shut. Elaine leaned closer to the fence and spoke without thinking. "Hey," she said softly. Hazel did not move. The words seemed to pass over her without catching, as if language itself had lost its grip here. Elaine tried again, lowering her voice, making it gentler. She took a step back, then another, testing whether the dog would react to distance instead of presence. Nothing. Elaine stood there longer than she realized, watching Hazel's shallow breathing, the way her sides barely rose and fell. She noticed details then. The dullness of Hazel's coat, the way her paws were dusty and worn, the slight tremor that ran through her body and disappeared again. This wasn't a dog that had been forgotten for an afternoon. Elaine looked at the house. She remembered the moving truck from days earlier, the vague awareness that someone had left. She remembered thinking nothing of it. People moved all the time. Houses emptied and refilled. That was how neighborhoods worked. But no one moved without taking their dog. A hot wave of anger rose in her, sudden and sharp. She stepped back from the fence and pulled her phone from her pocket, fingers shaking slightly as she dialed the local animal control number. The line rang and rang. A recorded message began explaining business hours. Elaine hung up before it finished. She returned to the fence and looked at Hazel again. The dog's eyes had drifted closed, not in sleep, but in withdrawal, like someone dimming a light to conserve power. Elaine made a decision then, not quickly, not dramatically, but with the same steady certainty that guided her through most of her life. She went to the garage and dragged out an old stepladder. The metal scraped against concrete, loud in the quiet afternoon. Elaine positioned it against the fence, tested its balance, then climbed. Her knees protested. She ignored them. From the top rung, the view into the yard sharpened, cruel in its clarity. Hazel lay in a shallow patch of dirt, ribs faintly visible beneath her fur. The chain was wrapped once around her front leg, not tight enough to cut, but enough to restrict movement. The gate stood less than 10 feet away. Elaine swung one leg over the fence and dropped into the yard. The sound of her landing stirred Hazel slightly. One eye opened. Elaine crouched slowly, keeping her hands visible, her movements deliberate. "I'm here," Elaine said, though she wasn't sure who the words were for. She knelt just outside the reach of the chain. Up close, the smell hit her. Heat, dust, dehydration. Elaine swallowed hard and reached for Hazel's water bowl. It was warm to the touch and lighter than it should have been. Empty. Elaine stood abruptly and crossed the yard to the back door of the house. Locked. She tried the side door. Locked. She peered through a window, shading the glass with her hands. The interior was bare, stripped of furniture, stripped of life. They had locked her out. Elaine returned to Hazel and crouched again, this time closer. She extended her hand slowly, palm down, stopping inches from Hazel's nose. Hazel sniffed weakly, then turned her head away, not in fear, but in resignation. Elaine felt tears burn unexpectedly behind her eyes. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay. You don't have to look at me." She pulled her phone out again, dialing 911 this time. Her voice was calm when the dispatcher answered, but her grip on the phone was white-knuckled. "There's a dog," Elaine said. "She's been left behind. She's chained in an empty yard. She needs help now." As she spoke, Hazel let out another low sound, barely audible. Elaine stayed where she was, one hand resting against the dirt, anchoring herself in the moment. For the first time in days, Hazel was not alone in her waiting, and that, Elaine realized, changed everything. Sirens didn't blare when help arrived. Nothing in this neighborhood needed that kind of noise. Instead, the response came in quieter signals. A police cruiser rolling to the curb, a rescue van pulling in behind it, doors opening with the plain efficiency of people who had seen too much and learned not to waste time. Elaine stayed in the yard, kneeling in the dirt, as if standing would make Hazel feel even smaller. A uniformed officer approached the fence first, tall and broad-shouldered, his expression tightening as he took in the empty house and the chained dog. He spoke to Elaine through the fence, voice low and professional. "Ma'am, are you the caller?" "Yes," Elaine said. "She's been here for days." The officer's jaw worked once, as if he was grinding down words he didn't want to say. He moved along the fence line, checking the gate, then the lock. It held fast. A heavy padlock, newer than the weathered chain, deliberate in its shine. "They secured it," he muttered. A woman stepped from the rescue van, a paramedic for animals, Elaine thought, because she moved with the same focused calm. Her hair was tucked under a cap, her shirt marked with the name of the local rescue group, Riverside County Animal Response. She carried a medical bag and a folded blanket, and her eyes went straight to Hazel. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, softly, not forcing the words into the air. "We're going to get you out." Hazel didn't lift her head. It wasn't refusal. It was absence. Elaine had seen that look once before in the library, in a man who came in every afternoon and stared at the same newspaper without turning the page. People thought he was reading. Elaine knew he was surviving. Hazel had the same stillness now, a body present, a mind somewhere far away. The officer returned with bolt cutters. Metal snapped. The gate swung open with a dry groan, as if the hinges were offended by being needed again. The rescue woman, her name tag read Mara, entered first, moving slow, careful to stay within Hazel's line of sight. She crouched several feet away, placed the blanket on the ground, and spoke again. "You don't have to do anything," Mara said. "You can just let us." Hazel's ear flicked once. That was all. Mara took it as permission. She signaled to the officer, who approached the maple tree where the chain was looped. The padlock near Hazel's collar was thick and tight. It wasn't something that could slip loose. It wasn't something that could, accidentally, be left behind. The officer set the cutters around it and squeezed. The metal resisted, then gave with a hard crack. The chain fell away from Hazel's neck. For a heartbeat, nothing changed. Hazel did not surge forward. She did not scramble back. She didn't even look down at the slack chain pooling on the ground. It was as if the boundary that had defined her world had been removed, and she simply hadn't noticed. Elaine's hands trembled. Mara slid closer, close enough now to see the fine dust clinging to Hazel's whiskers, the way her tongue stuck slightly against her teeth when she breathed. Mara reached out, not to pet, but to assess. 2 fingers lightly against Hazel's shoulder, checking response. Hazel flinched. Not from pain, from expectation. A quick, startled jerk like a door slamming in her mind. Her eyes opened wider, and for the first time Elaine saw panic flicker in them. Hazel tried to pull back, but her limbs didn't obey the command. Her body was too depleted to match the alarm rising inside her. Mara stopped immediately. She sat back on her heels. "Okay," she said. "Okay, I'm sorry, I won't rush you." The officer glanced at Elaine. "Is she aggressive?" Elaine shook her head. "No, she's not here." Mara nodded, as if that confirmed everything she already knew. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small bottle of water and a collapsible bowl. She poured carefully, then slid the bowl across the dirt, stopping it just within Hazel's reach. Hazel stared at it. For a long moment, she didn't move. Elaine wondered if Hazel even understood what it was anymore, if thirst had become just another feeling pushed aside by waiting. Then Hazel's nose lowered slowly. She sniffed. Her tongue touched the surface once, tentative, like testing whether the world was still real. Then she drank, small, careful laps, not frantic, not greedy. Her body had learned caution even with relief. Mara watched, her expression tight. When Hazel finished, she lifted her head and looked toward the fence, toward the gate, toward the direction the car had vanished days ago. Her eyes searched past Elaine, past Mara, past the officer, as if the only thing that mattered was still out there somewhere. The rescue team moved with practiced coordination. Mara and the officer unfolded the blanket, then slid it beneath Hazel with slow, gentle pressure. Hazel allowed it. She did not help. Her weight felt wrong, too light for her size, too fragile for an animal built to run and protect. As they lifted her, Hazel's head lolled slightly and her gaze landed on Elaine. Not gratitude, not affection. Just a flat, quiet recognition. "You are here." Elaine swallowed hard, unable to speak. The ride to the clinic happened inside the rescue van, air conditioning blasting against the heat that clung to Hazel's fur. Mara sat on the floor beside Hazel, one hand resting lightly on her side, feeling the rise and fall of each breath. She didn't pet her, she didn't chatter, she simply stayed in contact, steady as a metronome. Elaine followed in her own car, hands locked around the steering wheel. The neighborhood blurred past, familiar streets suddenly unfamiliar, as if she'd been living next to a disaster without realizing it. At Riverside Veterinary Emergency, the doors opened before they even reached them. A man in scrubs stepped out, mid-40s, tired eyes, hair pushed back with one impatient swipe. He took one look at Hazel and his face hardened into focus. "Get her inside," he said. "Now." They moved fast, lights, stainless steel, the sharp smell of antiseptic. Hazel's paws did not touch the floor. She floated past it on the blanket like an animal already half gone. A vet tech inserted a thermometer gently and called out the number. Another tried to find a vein for an IV, her brow furrowing as she failed once, twice. "Collapsed," the tech murmured. The veterinarian, Dr. Alan Greer, leaned in close, listening to Hazel's chest with a stethoscope. His expression changed subtly, as if he'd found something worse than dehydration. "Her heart's racing," he said. "She's holding herself together on fumes." Mara explained what they knew: abandoned yard, chained, days without water. Dr. Greer didn't react with surprise, only with anger so controlled it became colder. "She needs fluids," he said. "Slowly. Too fast could shock her system." Elaine stood near the doorway, feeling useless and in the way. She watched Hazel's eyes, half open now, fixed on nothing. Even under bright clinic lights, Hazel looked like she was still in that backyard, still facing a gate that wouldn't open. When the tech finally got the IV line in, Hazel didn't flinch. She didn't twitch. It was as if her body had stopped believing it deserved to respond. Dr. Greer ordered blood work, electrolytes, kidney values. He spoke in clipped terms, but Elaine heard the meaning beneath the science. The clock had been ticking for days, and no one could promise she'd made it in time. Hazel's breathing hitched suddenly. Her legs jerked once. The monitors beeped with new urgency. Dr. Greer leaned over her, adjusting the drip, checking her gums, speaking to the team with sharp precision. "Come on," he muttered. "Stay with us." Elaine stepped forward without thinking, stopping just behind Mara. She wanted to do something, anything, but all she could offer was her presence. Her eyes stayed on Hazel's face. Hazel's gaze drifted, unfocused, then found Elaine again. For one brief second, Hazel's eyes sharpened with awareness. Not trust, Not relief, just recognition, like seeing a familiar tree in a storm. Then her eyelids slid closed again. Dr. Greer exhaled hard. "She's stable," he said, "for now." Mara nodded, but her mouth tightened. "What about her mind?" Dr. Greer looked at Hazel, then at the chain collar lying in a plastic evidence bag. "That's the part that takes longer," he said quietly. "Sometimes it never comes back." Elaine's throat tightened. She pictured Hazel's eyes on the gate, the way she had waited past hunger, past heat, past reason. And for the first time, Elaine understood something terrifying. Freedom wasn't enough. Rescue wasn't a finish line. Hazel had been released from the chain, but she was still tethered to the moment her puppy disappeared. As the staff moved Hazel toward a quiet recovery kennel, Dr. Greer turned to Elaine. "Are you family?" he asked. Elaine hesitated. The truthful answer was no, but Hazel had no one else. Elaine's voice came out steadier than she felt. "I'm the one who heard her." Dr. Greer studied her for a moment, then nodded once. "Then don't disappear," he said, "not if you can help it." Elaine followed them down the hallway, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, and she realized that the hardest part wasn't getting Hazel out of the yard. It was convincing her she wouldn't be left behind again. The recovery wing was quieter than the rest of the clinic, built for the fragile kinds of silence that came after emergencies. The walls here didn't echo. The lights were dimmer. The floor smelled faintly of disinfectant and warm laundry instead of adrenaline. A row of kennels lined one side of the hallway, each holding a different version of fear. A cat pressed flat against a blanket, a small terrier trembling under a towel, an old lab staring blankly at the door. Hazel's kennel sat near the end. They had placed her on thick padding, IV line secured, a small fan angled toward the grate to keep air moving. The water bowl inside was full, clean, untouched. She lay on her side, eyes half open, gaze fixed straight ahead, as if the metal bars were not there at all. It wasn't sleep. It wasn't rest. It was vigilance, carved down to its last, simplest form. Watch the door. Elaine stood just outside the kennel for a moment, hands clasped tightly in front of her. She felt out of place in this building of fluorescent hallways and clipped voices. She felt like someone who had walked into the wrong movie and didn't know her lines. Mara had already gone to file reports. The officer had left. Dr. Greer was somewhere behind swinging doors, reading numbers off lab results. And Elaine was here, alone with a dog that didn't belong to her. Hazel's eyes shifted slightly, tracking Elaine's movement, not welcoming, not recognizing her as safe, simply noting someone is present, and presence is temporary. Elaine remembered what Dr. Greer had said, "Don't disappear," and she realized how absurdly difficult that could be. Elaine was a woman who lived by schedules, morning shifts, afternoon returns, library hours posted on a door. Life measured in predictable openings and closings. Hazel's trauma had no hours, it had no closing time. Elaine looked down the hallway, then back at Hazel, and made the simplest decision she had made in years. She found a folding chair. It was tucked in a supply closet between a mop bucket and stacks of paper towels. Elaine pulled it out, carried it down the hallway, and set it directly in front of Hazel's kennel. The metal legs scraped softly on the linoleum. Hazel flinched at the sound. Her ears flattened, her body tensed as if preparing for something painful. Elaine froze with one hand still on the chair. She backed it up an inch, then moved slower, lowering herself into it without another scrape. She let her palms rest on her knees, open and still. "I'm not going anywhere," Elaine said quietly. Hazel didn't respond, but the tension in her shoulders eased by the smallest fraction, a shift so subtle Elaine might have imagined it if she wasn't watching so carefully. Elaine sat. Minutes passed. Nurses walked by, murmuring to each other, glancing at Elaine with mild curiosity. One tech paused long enough to ask if she needed anything. Elaine shook her head. She didn't even know what she needed, only what Hazel might. Hazel stared at the door. Every time footsteps approached, Hazel's body tightened, her eyes widening slightly as if bracing for loss. When the footsteps passed and the door remained shut, she loosened again, but not fully. Not once did she reach for the water bowl. Not once did she shift into a comfortable position. She held herself in a limbo between readiness and exhaustion. Elaine stayed in the chair and opened her purse. She pulled out her phone, answered a text from her coworker with a quick explanation. "Something came up. I can't make it in tomorrow morning." Then she opened her email and began sorting through messages she'd been postponing. She wrote short replies, scheduled a meeting, approved a book order. Her life continued in small administrative fragments, but her body remained anchored here, facing Hazel. Hours went by. At some point, Dr. Greer stopped in front of Hazel's kennel. He looked at the IV drip, checked the monitor, read the chart clipped to the bars. His eyes flicked to Elaine in the chair. "You're still here," he said. Elaine nodded. "You said not to disappear." He studied Hazel through the bars. "Her kidneys are stressed," he said quietly. "Not failing, but strained. We got to her in time to avoid the worst of it." He paused, then added, "The harder part is what happens when we have to touch her." As if on cue, a tech approached carrying a clean bandage and antiseptic wipes. Hazel saw her and immediately tried to pull backward. The movement was weak and clumsy, but the panic behind it was sharp. She pressed herself against the back wall of the kennel, eyes wide, mouth open in silent panting. Not aggression. Something worse, terror without teeth. Elaine's stomach clenched. The tech stopped, unsure. "We just need to check her skin," she said gently. "I'm not taking her anywhere." Hazel's gaze snapped to Elaine, then to the hallway behind her, as if measuring exits that didn't exist. Elaine stood up slowly, the chair creaking slightly. Hazel's eyes widened further. Elaine stopped moving and lowered herself back into the chair. Hazel's panting slowed a little. Dr. Greer watched that exchange with the quiet intensity of a man collecting evidence. He nodded at the tech. "Not right now," he said. "Let her settle." The tech left. Hazel stayed pressed to the back wall for several minutes, trembling faintly. Elaine did not move. She didn't reach into the kennel. She didn't try to soothe with touch. She simply remained. Eventually, Hazel's body slid down a fraction, her paws loosening from their rigid brace. Her breathing steadied. But her eyes stayed on Elaine, as if asking a question she didn't have words for. "Will you still be here when I look away?" Elaine felt tears rise unexpectedly, not from drama, but from the sheer unfairness of what Hazel was asking. The question itself was a wound. It meant Hazel had learned deeply that looking away could be dangerous, that the moment you relaxed was the moment you were left. Elaine looked away first, not from Hazel, but from the door. She forced herself to soften her posture, to signal calm in her own body. She began to type again on her phone, thumbs moving slowly, letting time do what words couldn't. Around midnight, the clinic lights dimmed further. The hallway quieted. The distant sounds of the emergency room faded into occasional murmurs. Elaine's neck ached. Her back stiffened. She shifted in the chair carefully so it wouldn't scrape. Hazel's eyes fluttered. For the first time since Elaine arrived, Hazel's eyelids lowered for more than a blink. They closed, opened, closed again. Her breathing deepened slightly, the IV fluids and cool air easing the strain on her body. She was not sleeping yet, not fully, but she was allowing herself to drift. Elaine sat with her hands folded in her lap, holding her breath as if any movement might break the fragile permission Hazel was granting herself. A small sound came from Hazel's throat then, soft, almost inaudible. Elaine leaned forward just a little, careful. "It's okay," she whispered. "You can rest." Hazel's eyes opened once more, found Elaine, then closed again. This time they stayed closed longer. Her shoulders loosened, her jaw unclenched. The tension in her body seeped out, as if the ground beneath her had finally become solid. Dr. Greer passed by again, quieter now, holding a clipboard. He stopped when he saw Hazel's stillness. He glanced at Elaine, and for the first time something softened in his face. "She's sleeping," he murmured. Elaine didn't answer. She was afraid her voice would shake. She simply nodded, eyes fixed on Hazel as if watching a miracle happen in slow motion. Hours later, when the first pale light of morning began to press against the clinic windows, Hazel woke. Her head lifted slightly. Her eyes scanned the kennel, then the hallway, then landed on Elaine. Elaine was still in the chair. Hazel stared for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, barely, almost imperceptibly, her head lowered back onto the padding. She exhaled, a slow breath that sounded like surrender, but was something else entirely. It sounded like the beginning of trust. Elaine's phone buzzed against her palm just after noon, startling her so sharply she nearly dropped it. She had stepped into the clinic's small waiting area to stretch her legs, to drink coffee that tasted like cardboard, to let the stiffness in her back loosen for a moment. Hazel was dozing again in the kennel, the kind of fragile rest that could fracture if the world moved too loudly. The screen showed a number she didn't recognize. Elaine answered anyway. "This is Elaine Parker." A man's voice came through, measured, tired, edged with something heavy. "Miss Parker, this is Detective Simon Hale. I'm calling about the dog found at the vacant property on Hawthorne Drive." Elaine's stomach tightened. "How did you get my number?" "Officer Martinez gave it to me. You're listed as the reporting party. I'm following up." There was a pause, a soft shuffle of papers. "First, how's the dog doing?" "Alive?" Elaine said. The word felt too small for what it held. "She's starting to rest. But she's terrified." Detective Hale exhaled slowly, as if even good news required effort. "I need to ask you a few questions, and I need to tell you what we found." Elaine's grip on the phone tightened. "Okay. Do you know the family who lived there?" Elaine hesitated. She knew them the way neighbors knew each other in quiet suburbs. Names on packages, waves across driveways, holiday lights in December. She had never sat at their table. She had never held their secrets. "I know of them," she said. "I've lived next door for 6 years." "We ran the property records," Hale said. "The house was sold in a rush, cash buyer, quick closing. They left town earlier than their listed move-out date." Another pause. "We also pulled the dog license registration from county records. The dog is registered under a name." Elaine's throat tightened. "Hazel." "Yes," Hale said. "Hazel. The file also lists a puppy, registered 6 months ago. A male, same address." Elaine felt a cold, sharp line draw itself through her chest. "They took him," she said quietly, though she already knew. Hale didn't deny it. "We confirmed through a highway toll camera they left the state. Nevada plates and temporary registration. The vehicle was recorded crossing the border 3 days ago." Elaine looked through the waiting area window toward the kennel hallway, as if distance alone could make Hazel feel less vulnerable. "So they're gone?" "They're gone," Hale confirmed. "But that's not the end of it." Elaine waited. Hale spoke again, and his voice turned harder. "We found something in the trash bins left at the curb behind the property. Not garbage pickup, private disposal. They paid someone to haul it. There were documents in the bottom of one bag, torn up but not enough." Elaine's mouth went dry. "What kind of documents?" "Printed ads," Hale said. "Classified listings. Photos of German Shepherd mixed puppies. Sale price listed in cash. Multiple postings under different accounts. Same background, same kitchen floor tiles." Elaine felt nauseous. The images formed in her mind with cruel clarity. The puppy on the backseat blanket, safe and chosen, while Hazel remained in the yard like a forgotten appliance. "They were selling puppies?" Elaine asked. "Yes," Hale said, "and the dates line up with multiple litters." He paused again. "Miss Parker, it's possible Hazel was used for breeding." Elaine couldn't speak for a moment. Her mind fought the idea because it made the abandonment feel even colder, less personal, more transactional. A dog as inventory, a mother as a machine that produced something valuable. Hale continued. "We also spoke to a neighbor from 2 streets over. She remembered hearing puppies months ago. The family told her they were helping a friend with a litter. Then the puppies disappeared quickly." Elaine swallowed hard. "What does that mean legally?" "It means we can pursue neglect charges," Hale said. "Potential cruelty charges depending on evidence, but there's a complication." Elaine's heart sank. "What complication?" "They've already contacted Animal Services," Hale said, voice flat with disbelief. They claimed Hazel was stolen. They're demanding her return. Elaine's body went cold. For a moment she couldn't breathe. She pictured Hazel in the kennel, finally learning to sleep, and her throat tightened with panic. They can't, Elaine said. They left her. Hale's voice softened slightly, not with sympathy, but with grim realism. They're saying it was an accident. They claim the move was chaotic. The dog was in the backyard, and they forgot. They're offering to pay vet bills. They're positioning themselves as overwhelmed people who made a mistake. Elaine's free hand curled into a fist. That's not a mistake. I know, Hale said, but I need the case to prove intent. Not just abandonment, but deliberate neglect. Otherwise, ownership laws get ugly. Elaine stood abruptly, chair legs scraping, and immediately regretted the sound. She lowered her voice. How do we prove intent? Hale's answer came like a door closing. We need more evidence. We need a pattern. We need documentation. We need someone who bought a puppy. We need vet records, if any exist. We need anything showing Hazel wasn't family. She was a tool. Elaine's eyes burned. She felt a wave of helpless anger, the kind that made the world tilt. And if you can't find it? Hale didn't sugarcoat it. A judge could order the dog returned while we investigate. It happens. Elaine's vision blurred. She stared at the beige wall of the waiting area, suddenly unable to bear how ordinary it looked. Ordinary walls, ordinary floors, ordinary people making ordinary rules. Rules that could send Hazel back to die in a yard without water. Elaine's voice came out low and steady, surprising even her. No? Silence hummed on the line. Hale cleared his throat. Miss Parker, I understand you're upset. You don't understand, Elaine cut in, then stopped because she could hear how sharp she sounded. She forced herself to breathe. Detective, she watches the door. She panics when anyone leaves. She's learning, slowly, that someone can stay. If she sees those people again, she'll break. Hale didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was quiet. That's why I'm calling. We need to move fast. Elaine's mind raced. I can help, she said. Tell me what to do. First, Hale said, I need a statement from you. Detailed, timeline, what you saw, what you smelled, how the yard looked, everything. He paused. Second, I need to look at the property myself, and I need to speak to you in person. Can you meet me there this afternoon? Elaine glanced toward the hallway again. Hazel's kennel was out of sight, but Elaine felt the pull of her, felt like leaving the clinic even for an hour might be the wrong move. I can, Elaine said, but I won't be gone long. Hale exhaled. Good. Another beat. Miss Parker, there's something else. Elaine braced herself. We ran the names, Hale said. The family. They've been investigated before. Not charged, but reported. His voice tightened. Different county. Different dog. Elaine's blood turned to ice. What happened? Complaint was dropped, Hale said. No evidence. They moved away again. Elaine closed her eyes. She pictured Hazel's dull eyes in that backyard, the chain, the empty bowl. She imagined it wasn't the first time. So they do this, Elaine whispered. They might, Hale said, and that's why we're not letting this go. Elaine ended the call and stood there for a moment, letting the weight settle. Her legs felt unsteady. The clinic air smelled suddenly too clean, too controlled. She walked back down the hallway toward Hazel's kennel. Hazel was awake. Her head was lifted slightly. Her eyes were on the doorway, as if she had been listening too, in the way animals listen to shifts in a room. She didn't know about toll cameras or legal ownership. But she knew something had changed in Elaine's body. Knew the tension, the fear. Elaine stopped in front of the kennel and lowered herself into the chair again. Hazel's gaze snapped to her immediately, sharp with question. Elaine leaned forward slightly, careful, and spoke in the softest voice she had. They're not taking you, she whispered. Not back. Not ever. Hazel stared at her, unmoving. Then her body relaxed a fraction, just enough to suggest she had heard the tone, if not the words. Her eyelids lowered halfway, still watching, still measuring. Elaine sat there for a long time after that, phone heavy in her pocket, heart heavier. Outside, the world continued its ordinary rhythm. Somewhere, the family that had left Hazel behind, unpacked boxes in a new house, hung pictures on clean walls, called their puppy by a new name, and told themselves they were good people. Inside this hallway, a different kind of story was forming, one that would not let them rewrite what they'd done. Elaine met Detective Hale at the property just after 4. The afternoon sun had softened into a warmer angle, throwing long shadows across the sidewalk. The house looked even emptier in daylight than it had from Elaine's kitchen window. No curtains shifting, no recycling bin pulled back in. The grass along the edges had started to grow wild, as if the lawn itself had sensed permission to stop performing. Hale stood by his unmarked car with a small camera and a folder under his arm. He nodded when Elaine approached, then walked with her to the side gate where the bolt cutters had bitten through the lock days earlier. The metal was still scarred. "This is where she was," Elaine said, her voice low. Hale stepped into the yard carefully, scanning like someone trained to notice what other people overlooked. He crouched near the maple tree, ran a gloved hand along the chain marks pressed into the dirt, and photographed the shallow groove that formed Hazel's old circle. He didn't need dramatics. The evidence spoke with the blunt language of physics, a radius of confinement, a place worn down by repeating footsteps. Elaine watched him work and felt something new settle in her. Not just anger, not just sadness, but resolve, sharpened by clarity. This backyard wasn't a tragic accident. It was a decision made slowly, on purpose, and then locked into place. Hale stood and looked at the porch. "You said there was a towel?" Elaine nodded and pointed. It still lay near the steps, faded and sun-bleached. Hale photographed it, then lifted it carefully into an evidence bag. "It matters," Elaine said, surprising herself. Hale's eyes flicked to her. "Why?" Elaine swallowed. "It smelled like the puppy," she said. "She kept it close." Hale didn't respond right away. Then he nodded once, like a man learning a language he'd never been taught. "We'll add it," he said quietly. They finished the walk-through quickly. Hale collected what he could, documents from a broken bin lid, a torn corner of a printed ad that matched what he'd described on the phone, a cheap collar tag missing its ring. He took Elaine's statement in the shade of the porch roof, recording her timeline while she described the sound she'd heard, the smell she'd noticed, the look in Hazel's eyes. When Hale finally clicked off the recorder, he exhaled through his nose and rubbed his forehead. "We're pushing for an emergency hold," he said. "It's not guaranteed, but we'll try to keep her as evidence while we build the case." Elaine's hands clenched in her pockets. "And if we can't?" Hale looked at her, and for the first time since they'd spoken, his professional distance cracked enough to show the strain underneath. "Then we move to the next step," he said. "We fight in court. We bring in the vet. We show photos. We show records. We make it hard for a judge to send her back." Elaine heard the unsaid part. Hard, not impossible. She drove back to the clinic with that word lodged in her throat. Hazel was awake when Elaine returned, sitting upright in her kennel for the first time. Not pacing. She didn't have the restless energy for that, but upright, head angled toward the hallway, ears tense. The moment Elaine appeared, Hazel's posture shifted, as if something inside her loosened its grip. Elaine stopped in front of the kennel, and Hazel's gaze locked onto her with fierce concentration. There it was again, that silent question. Elaine didn't waste the answer on words this time. She reached into her purse and pulled out the same folding chair, setting it down with the practiced gentleness of someone learning how not to startle a wounded soul. She sat. She stayed still. Hazel watched her sit as if it were a new kind of magic. Minutes passed. Hazel's breathing slowed. The kennel felt less like a trap and more like a room that happened to have bars. Elaine felt her own shoulders relax for the first time all day. Dr. Greer came down the hallway with a clipboard. He stopped at Hazel's kennel, checked her chart, and nodded. "She's improving," he said. "Physically." "And mentally?" Elaine asked. Greer glanced at Hazel, then at Elaine. "She's still on the edge," he said, "but she's not falling off anymore." He hesitated, then added, "Animal Services called the clinic. The registered owners asked about reclaiming her. They're pushing." Elaine's body tensed. Hazel's ears twitched, reacting to Elaine's shift, even if she couldn't understand the words. "What did you say?" Elaine asked. Greer's mouth tightened. "I said she's under medical hold," he replied. "That's all I can say until the legal process catches up." He looked down at Hazel. "But Elaine, if this goes the wrong way, she could be ordered back. It's rare, but it happens." Elaine felt the air thin. "So what do I do?" Greer studied her. "You keep doing what you're doing," he said. "You be consistent. You let her heal enough to be documented. You let her show who she is when she feels safe." His voice dropped. "And you prepare yourself." "For what?" "For the possibility," he said carefully, "that staying means more than sitting in a chair." Elaine understood him then. Staying might mean paperwork, hearings, testimony, calls, money, time, disruption. Staying might mean becoming the kind of person she'd never planned to be, someone who fought loudly in a world she preferred to navigate quietly. That night, Elaine went home for the first time in days. She showered, changed clothes, and stood in her small kitchen staring at the open cabinet where she kept her tea. The house felt too quiet, the kind of quiet she had once cherished. Now it felt like absence. Elaine boiled water anyway. She made tea she didn't drink. She walked through her living room noticing the shape of her life. One sofa, two chairs, shelves lined with books, a throw blanket folded neatly. Everything in its place, everything controlled. Hazel had lived in a circle of dirt, chained to a tree, and still believed in return. Elaine turned off the stove and sat at her dining table. She opened her laptop and began reading the county statutes on animal neglect, ownership disputes, emergency holds. The language was cold and bureaucratic, but Elaine forced herself through it the way she had forced herself through grief when her husband died years earlier. One paragraph at a time, one breath at a time. Near midnight, she typed a single email to her supervisor at the library, requesting leave. Not a day, not two, time. She didn't explain everything. She simply wrote, "I'm needed for something urgent and ongoing." She hit send before she could second-guess it. At dawn, she went back to the clinic with a bag of supplies she'd bought in a 24-hour store, a new water bowl, soft blankets, a chew toy shaped like a small log. She wasn't sure Hazel would touch any of it, but Elaine needed to bring something that belonged to a future. Hazel watched her through the kennel bars as Elaine set the items down outside. Elaine didn't push them in. She didn't force the idea of comfort onto Hazel. She placed the new blanket nearby and sat in her chair. Minutes later, Hazel stood. It was slow, careful, the movement of an animal testing whether her own legs still belonged to her. She took one step, then another, toward the front of the kennel. Her eyes never left Elaine. She paused, then lowered her nose toward the blanket Elaine had placed. Hazel sniffed once, then, without warning, she took the blanket gently in her mouth and dragged it toward herself inch by inch until she could lay down on it. It wasn't gratitude. It was acceptance. Elaine felt her throat tighten. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She let the moment exist without stealing it with words. A week passed, then another. Hazel began drinking water when it was offered. She began eating small portions. She allowed Dr. Greer to examine her, only if Elaine stayed in the chair, only if Elaine's presence remained visible. Hazel's progress was slow, but it was real. The fear in her eyes loosened from a constant sharpness into something softer, something that looked almost like curiosity. The legal process moved in its own stubborn rhythm. Detective Hale called with updates. They'd located buyers of puppies. They'd found payment records. They'd found a series of text messages where the family discussed getting rid of the older dog once they were settled. Each new piece of evidence tightened the net. Then, one afternoon, Animal Services arrived at the clinic with a formal notice. Hazel was being transferred into protective custody under an emergency cruelty investigation. She would not be returned while the case proceeded. Elaine read the paper twice, not trusting her eyes. Dr. Greer saw her expression and nodded. "It's the best outcome for now," he said. Elaine sat in her chair in front of Hazel's kennel and let her shoulders drop. Hazel had no idea what a notice meant, no idea what protective custody sounded like in court. But she watched Elaine, and she watched Elaine breathe, and she sensed that the air in the room had changed. Hazel stood again, more confidently this time. She approached the kennel door and, in a motion so small it could have been missed, pressed her nose against the bars near Elaine's knee. Elaine froze. Hazel held the contact for a heartbeat. Warm breath, light pressure, then withdrew and sat back, as if embarrassed by her own bravery. Her ears shifted slightly, uncertain. Elaine didn't reach out. She didn't rush. She simply whispered, "I'm here." Hazel's eyes stayed on her, searching. And then Hazel did something Elaine had not expected, something that felt like a decision rather than a reflex. Hazel lowered her head and rested her chin on her own paws, but she angled her body so she could still see Elaine clearly. A posture of peace that still required proof. 2 days later, Dr. Greer cleared Hazel for release to a foster arrangement, someone stable, someone consistent, someone with no sudden disappearances. Animal Services offered a short list of approved fosters. Elaine looked at the list and felt nothing. She looked at Hazel and felt everything. Elaine signed the paperwork that afternoon. When the clinic staff opened Hazel's kennel door and clipped a leash to her collar, Hazel froze. Her body stiffened, old panic rising like a tide. Elaine moved into Hazel's line of sight immediately and sat down on the floor, right there in the hallway, careless of germs or dignity. Hazel's eyes snapped to her. Elaine didn't tug the leash. She didn't coax with treats. She only patted her own thigh lightly, slow and steady, and waited. Hazel took a step, then another. Her paws touched the hallway floor like it was unfamiliar ground. She moved toward Elaine in short, cautious increments until she was close enough to smell her. Hazel's nose brushed Elaine's sleeve. Elaine held her breath. Hazel lowered her head. Then she leaned, just slightly, and let the side of her face rest against Elaine's knee. Not for long, just long enough to say, "I'm choosing this." Elaine's eyes burned. She kept her voice steady. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, Hazel, let's go home." Outside, the sun was bright, the air clean. Elaine opened her car door and waited. Hazel hesitated, then jumped in with a stiffness that spoke of old pain, but also new courage. She settled on the back seat, not on a blanket this time, but on a soft bed Elaine had placed there. As Elaine started the engine, Hazel's head turned toward the clinic door, then back to Elaine in the driver's seat. Her ears flicked as if asking where they were going. Elaine glanced at her in the mirror. "Somewhere that stays," she said. The car pulled away, not in a rush, not dramatic, just moving forward. Hazel watched the world pass through the window, and for the first time in her life, leaving did not mean being abandoned. It meant being taken with. Hazel got her second chance because one person refused to look away. If this story moved you, take 10 seconds and tell me this. What would you have done if you heard that sound next door? Write your answer in the comments, even if it's just one sentence. And if you believe animals deserve loyalty too, please hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next true-to-life story that might change the way you see the world.